today was the end of the proverbial transfer window. So, in classic American Scouser fashion, we bring out the real deal bullshit meter. And the beauty here is everything we actually talk about from here on out, Paul, actually occurred. Um, you mentioned Villa. So let's start with the most active team in the Premier League. And I understand City bought players, but City bought players for the future. City bought bigger players. No side, in my opinion, shocked the rest of the league more than what Villa has done over the last week. So let's start with the big announcements from the weekend. Um, Fabrizio Romano, I believe in this case, was actually first to report that Aston Villa had signed Marcus Rashford on loan with an option to buy, also coming to terms on a straight loan deal with Marco Asensio. Now, obviously, in all of this was the news that John Duran would be heading off to Saudi Arabia, in which I'm pretty sure Emery said, "We're having a fucking pizza party tonight." Um, and for anyone who doesn't know, John Duran has all the skill in the world, had a contract until 2030, and they basically tried to sell him to every single club. They just wanted to make sure that they got their price because the guy has every bit of Mario Balotelli like fireworks and negativity surrounding his off the field play. Um, what are your thoughts on the rehabilitation that is Rashford, specifically when it comes to Marcus Rashford? I actually really like Villa as a destination because I like a manager like Emery having a kid like Rashford and maybe figuring out a way to get the best out of him. Because we all know there is a true class player. I'm not calling him world class, but there is a class player inside that body if he puts it all together.
It's kind of wild to think of like what we know of Marcus Rashford in terms of his philanthropic ventures. What he does for the community is so starkly contrasted by what you hear about him as a professional.
Yep.
It's very hard to reconcile the differences. Does a lot for the community, helps out, disadvantaged kids, stays out too late, doesn't apply himself, is in the right mindset come game time. That shit's hard to reconcile. I hope that this is a real sort of awakening for him in terms of I hope that this is the reset that he needs, because I think maybe sometimes you just get so used to a toxic work environment and the chaos that you just sort of disconnect from it and you don't apply yourself the way you really need to. I'm hoping that this is that for him. I hope that this is fresh water for him and that he can sort of reinvigorate his career, because despite being a United player, I like him as a guy and I think he seems like a good kid. I'd like to see him do well. So hopefully this is the change he needs.
I just find it hilarious that there was talk he's going to Napoli, he's going to AC Milan, he might go to Barcelona, and then there was this rumor that he was considering a loan to West Ham just so he could move back to London, and then people just out of nowhere it's like, oh, he's going to Villa. And I love the idea of United supporters waking up knowing that one of their own basically forced through a loan to a Premier League team was basically vilified in the press in all levels, and now wakes up and will probably be starting in the round of 16 in the Champions League in 2 weeks, which is just absolutely fucking comical in itself, and I am all here for it. Speaking of two other players who escaped the Europa Conference and found themselves at a Champions League club, David Ornstein reporting late today that Villa reached agreements with Chelsea to sign both Axel Diassi and playmaker um, João Felix. Now, neither of these have an option to buy, um, but there were rumors that there was a lot of negotiations. Villa's been trying to buy João Felix for a long time. This is the framework of if they do really well, you can come back in. But I think this is Chelsea making sure they protect that new business model, which is profiting on all players at all times as much as possible. Um, what are your thoughts on these two moves? Because I feel like in João Felix, they get a maverick. Um, No one has gotten the best out of him, but that might be because at the best and at his prime, when he was ready to be the biggest star in the world, he got sent to play for Diego Simeone as an attacking midfielder. And I feel like that could like basically stunt anyone's growth. Um, and what are your thoughts of Diassi? Because I've seen good from him and bad from him, both at Monaco and and in his time at Chelsea. What are your thoughts here on what Villa did to strengthen the squad?
Well, I think the Saucy's a good. I think that'll be interesting. I think he's got a little bit of man, he plays a little bit too high risk, low reward for me at times. Like to me, he takes chances that are unnecessary. But I also think that he's a player that looks for that explosive play. So like I think he's just got to rein that in a little bit and be a little bit more disciplined. I think it's very, very difficult to evaluate center backs at Chelsea at times because they have such they're so disorganized all over the place. I think it's really ever since they lost Rudiger, it's been really difficult to find any sort of solidity there. I think it could be a good move. I mean, Villa has invested in this, right? But like they've invested in center backs, but they've had a difficult time keeping them healthy. So I think that's going to be the main thing. And then João Felix, I think the Serie A is a great league for him. Slows down that pace of play, allows him to play in a little bit more space. He's been essentially in football purgatory for like the last 3 years, so it'll be interesting to see.
It'll be interesting to see what he does at Villa. I think in the situation that he plays for Emery, he'll get. I don't think he'll be a starter at Villa by any means. I mean, when you have Morgan Rogers and Ramsey in the midfield, but I think if you are chasing a game, you need to break down a low block. If you're struggling to score, I think you can bring in a João Felix, and he has a bit of magic in him. Like he's not Martin Odegaard, but he can give you a Martin Odegaard like moment to help create something that maybe no one else currently in that Villa side, especially since they decided to loan out um, Emi Buendia during this transfer window. So another team that was very active, tried very hard to get different deals across the line. They had Diassi actually signed as well, but he decided to go to Villa, which I don't blame him because they're in the Champions League, was Tottenham Hotspur. A lot of clubs are claiming they're having injury crises. Tottenham can legitimately, I mean, they
Yeah,
literally have been playing midfielders at center back, and this weekend they're starting like complete kids, and we're forced to start Richarlison, which lets you know exactly how barren of talent they are. But they pull off a couple really good signings, in my opinion, this week. First, they basically pip Wolves. Wolves was about to loan Kevin Danso from RC Lens. He's a solid center back, and they hijacked the deal right at the last minute. He jumped for the opportunity. He signed on a permanent deal. And then today, after all the reports that the kid had passed twice and he was looking at Arsenal and United, Arsenal thought they had the player, I guess, because he was flying to London, albeit they didn't realize he was flying to take a Spurs medical. They signed Matthias Tell, the young striker from Bayern Munich, highly rated. They get him on a loan. Originally was reported that it was a straight loan. Come to find out, it is not. He has agreed to a 6-year contract if they make his release clause fully committed. He can play wide as well. I really, really like this signing for Spurs. This is finally like Spurs making, like, I would have liked it if we made this move, to be totally honest. Like,
oh
this is
yeah,
a kid I think is going to be a star. And I don't think he has to play every minute, but right now they need him to play. And I think it's a perfect marriage, him going to Spurs.
yeah. I was gonna say if you look at the profile for young attackers across Europe, there's probably not many players with a higher ceiling than this one. I think any of the top clubs um, would be happy with this. Arsenal, Liverpool, City. I think any one of those teams would shake your hand off if you offered him at that price for that contract. So yeah, it's a big time pickup by Spurs.
And I'm not saying if he hadn't gotten maybe the wages he wanted or the terms he wanted, that he wouldn't have picked Arsenal or he wouldn't have gone to United. But anyone who doesn't think that that kid hasn't been in training every single day watching the best player at his club, and we can all laugh about the mouth breather, but Harry Kane is still the best player at Bayern Munich right now. He's probably the best. He's the best striker in the Bundesliga right now. He's scoring boatloads of goals. They're winning. And you got to imagine if you're a 19-year-old kid and you're basically learning off Harry Kane, every day. You're talking a bit about what it's like to live in London. You're talking a little bit about what those Spurs supporters are like. And you know, if Harry Kane got wind that this kid was considering these couple clubs, he's putting in all the calls. He's getting all the, it's like the recruiting trips in college, when you stop at a college campus.
Yeah.
If you already got the guy in your ear telling you how great the stadium is, the facilities are, life in North London is, this just makes total sense to me. Another couple deals that made a lot of sense to me. You mentioned one already. Let's start with that one. Nico Gonzalez to Manchester City. My only question will be, how will Nico Gonzalez feel next year when Rodri is back and he realizes Pep only plays one of them and it is Rodri, unless they have a good feeling that Rodri's seriously going to look at either Madrid or somebody else in the offseason and maybe is ready for that next step. I love this signing. You touched on it. He's a solid player. He'll fit in like, water to a duck, as they say. Brilliant signing by City, right? Pretty much in some ways, all four of their signings were really solid this January transfer window. If we're being unbiased and fair.
Yeah, and I think this. I mean, we talk about Rodri, but this move could have just as much to do with the state of De Bruyne as anything else. And I think this is a player that Pep knows really well. You can play him in multiple positions across the midfield, and this is a player that Pep knows from the Barca Academy days, like from the youth days. So he's very well aware of what this guy is, what he can do across the board. I think it's a really really solid pickup for City and for what they need. We'll see.
And the last thing that we'll talk about here was one. I thought this was an interesting one because when Evan Ferguson bust onto the scene, not only did we hear about him a lot in our Discord channel because he was about to be yet another Irishman to spurn Ireland and start to play for England, but he stuck to his. So far, he stuck to his liberties. We'll see how far he goes with it because he's only made one appearance, so he still has the opportunity to switch. But we kid, guys. Evan Ferguson from Brighton going to West Ham. I love this move for West Ham. It is a straight loan deal, but I just have to feel like West Ham knows that if they do this right, they'll have an opportunity to sign this player. I think he fits that West Ham style better than he fits the current Brighton style. And I think that's why I'm so excited about it because when you saw him play under Potter originally, when he made his debut, it looked like he was going to already be playing at a much bigger club by now. Injuries have set him back a bit, but having two additional managers during that period with two different philosophies didn't help a, hold up striker back to goal type of guy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because he looks so out of place in Brighton tactically, and then you bring him to West Ham and you're like, well, Graham Potter couldn't figure out how to do it in Brighton, and then he brings him to the new club. I think the indication is it obviously is a manager who fancies a player, and it shows you that what wasn't working at Brighton didn't have much to do with Potter or the player, but more to do with the players around them and how to get that to work, right? So he obviously sees something that he likes in tandem with the Jared Bowens and the Diabies and the pieces that they have there. So around him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here.
So if I asked you, the most active sides in the Premier League this year, this January, obviously were City, Villa. I think Villa made 5 signings, sold Duran, but arguably the most important piece of business they did was probably not selling Ollie Watkins to Arsenal. At the end of the day, it was probably as important of any player that they brought in. City brought in 4 new players, all of which by the end of the season could be starters, all of which I believe will be starters by next season, which is pretty good business as well, right? Who is the proverbial winner? Who's the proverbial loser in your mind when it comes to Premier League teams and sides this transfer window?
Oh, I think probably Villa, just because they were the most active here. I think it's ironic that both City and Villa are the 2 teams that did the most business here and probably under the most financial scrutiny as well. Villa has been, edging that line for a number of windows now. I think the big sale obviously helps them. I think the biggest piece about that, we talked about a lot of players. I think the Danielle Mullen piece of business is going to end up being a really, really good piece for them. I think he's got that. I think he's got the top end pace and physicality to be a frontline player for a lot of years in the Premier League. I also think that the Julio Soler acquisition for Bournemouth is going to fly under the radar. That has the potential to be a huge, huge signing down the road. One of Argentina's big up and coming talents as built, and we'll see if he can live up to it. I think the big question for me is like, can he handle the pace of play and physicality of the Premier League? So we'll see. But I probably give it to Villa.
Yeah, I'd have to give it to Villa. I think they did the best work. There were other moves that happened. We couldn't touch on everything. Ben Chilwell finally got out of purgatory. I mean, he's no longer playing in the academy games at Chelsea. He's going to Crystal Palace on loan, which isn't a bad signing at all for Crystal Palace. I think that's a veteran presence that can really help you and do a job. Um, I think ultimately the big story for me is that once again, clubs like United, they dipped their toe in the water a little bit, but they weren't able to really make the signings they wanted to make because of their concerns over financial fair play or the PSR rules. I think the same thing is happening with Chelsea. They did make a signing today. I forget who it was. I think it's a South American teenager, of course, that'll probably go on 1,700 loans. He's probably already in Strasbourg as we speak, starting his first of 7 years worth of loans before he gets sold for the exact same dollar amount they bought him for, plus $1 so they can claim a profit. But let's take a look